I'm pleased to report that because of our efforts to rebuild the strength of America, the world is a safer place. While the world is safer, it is not safe.
Survival. Survival is power without dogma. We manipulate in terms of the ultimate success of our goals, not their meaning.
International communism seeks to crush and undermine and destroy the independence of the Americans. We cannot let that happen here.
I don't believe it. It worked because you lost your country before we ever got here.
Our forefathers struggled through their lives building a dream.
A dream, eh? Well, tell me about it. Dreams are very interesting. Let us know what's underneath.
It's hard to believe it's been 10 years since my country's takeover by the Soviet Union. They did it without firing a shot. We just woke up one morning, and they were here. Freedom. What a strange-sounding word. Free. 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 You say it enough times and it begins to mean nothing. Freedom. What a strange-sounding word. Free. 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 You say it enough times and it begins to mean nothing. Free. 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 You say it enough times and it begins to mean nothing.
Not nothing, but maybe, you know, not what you think it means. You say it enough times and figure out what's underneath it, maybe it'll look a little different. I'm struck by something you just said. You said, we woke up one morning and they were there, and you're talking about the Soviet Union, but when you wake up one morning and somebody's just there, it's as if they're in your family, you know? Have you ever thought about that?
Building this land, what do you have to do with that? The Milford I ever knew about was good, loyal Americans trying to build it up. You come back from Vietnam, tearing it down. Then you go off with some show-off thing against this new bunch. The only good it did was call a lot of attention to yourself. I was trying to do the right thing. I was trying to stop them. You lost the land. I gotta live with you, eat with you. Don't mean I gotta talk to you.
There's obviously a very bad relationship with your father here, you know. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of rejection and hostility, and somehow I think, you know, you feel the blame for it. But that's a really kind of severe dad you've got. You know, have you ever tried to actually explore your feelings towards him?
I am not free to do anything I want the way I want. I have superiors to whom I must answer. I'm surrounded by spies and informers, both American and Soviet. There are men in the Kremlin who have always been and still are suspicious of our entire plan of occupation. They would feel much more comfortable if America were crushed by an iron fist. And they may yet do it.
this is important because, you know, what you're saying now is that this is another image of your father that you've sort of split off from the other image and put onto the Soviets. So maybe that explains that business about waking up in the morning and they're there and the family next to you, that very bad father image. You seem to have split it off from your own father, whom you're trying to preserve, and put it onto the Russians, you know? What do you think of that?
What difference does it make?
You Americans, you're such a mystery to everyone but yourselves. You just never think about it. I think if I could understand this man, I could understand America.
Maybe, and maybe if he could understand himself, he'd be a little bit better off too, but you know, it seems like everybody around here is looking for an authority or some kind of home or some kind of family. There's a great deal of lost people out there. They're all confused. They don't know who they are. I think maybe you're trying to organize them somehow in your cause, you know, playing on their confusion and their desires.
That's a lie. But were you like the rest of the countrymen, almost happy to accept failure because it meant you didn't really have to accept responsibility anymore? It's none of your goddamn business. It's none of your goddamn business.
This is the, you know, the emotional center of your dream, and this is the heart of it, because you see how you're fighting that truth? It's none of your business, it's a lie, and then suddenly the desire comes through. That desire for intimacy, that desire for closeness with your father, that longing, okay? And I think the big question is, what are you going to be able to do with it? Are you going to be able to tolerate it? Tolerate the softness and the weakness and your human needs, or you're going to close it off again?
Patriotism when it counted? Where was that willingness to sacrifice? Nobody wanted to join the damn army to defend the country unless they got paid well. Nobody wanted to give any time to public service unless they could make a career out of it. And I didn't notice a lot of us giving up our lives in the last 10 years.
What are you doing?
Starts the revolution.
This is a bad sign, I'm afraid, you know, because instead of taking that insight, instead of becoming more human, more open, what you're doing is you're trying to, that old right-wing trick again of pulling everybody together by sending them off to war, by exalting military virtues, by making people hard, by giving them some kind of sacrifice that they can have by killing an external enemy. You know, that's the history of the world, and you're just repeating it.
are because our forefathers struggled through their lives building a dream. Sacrificing for us, and that was what was called for. Dying for it. We're the result. Their dream didn't die with them. It lives in us. I won't abandon that legacy. America is not a flag or a piece of territory. It's each one of us here, all around the country. That's what America is. Give it up.
This was the land of opportunity, where everyone had the right to truth and justice, where everyone had the right to be free. Most of the people around here were too young to know what things were like before all this happened. But I remember, and I've got something to live for. I'll live for my ideals. I'll live for me, and I live for you. The flag is forbidden.
Well, my friend, you may not be afraid anymore, but I'm really scared, you know. This sort of stuff scares me because now it appears that being free to you is just the right to pursue your paranoid hostility and to organize the masses accordingly, you know. You think it's going to work, but it won't, because the enemy you're after is really inside of you. It's the same old swindle. That legacy you're not giving up is the legacy of domination. It's what threw people off the land in the first place. It's what drives them into misery, causes wars all around the world. So my advice to you is, you know, you better stop dreaming and wake up, or I'm going to turn off your switch.
Don't touch me, don't talk to me, don't come near me. It's going to be so grinding time. I don't want nobody touching my money. Gentrify a hovel, turn off the heat in the Cold War, Cold War. And all white, all male, macho elite controls the guns of Russia and the USA. They're never wrong, they never make mistakes. But violent hormones show a person till he breaks. Missile envy, missile envy, missile envy. Death, toys for military boys. I don't want nobody touching my H-bomb. Prove how tough you are, keep your psyche numb in the Cold War, Cold War. I don't want nobody touching my H-bomb.
Baryshnikov! You know, America has been called a soap opera by some critics, and who better to discuss that aspect of the miniseries than the queen of the genre herself, none other than Joan Collins, Dynasty superstar, who joins us live from Hollywood via satellite. Joan? Joan?
Hello, Barbara.
Now tell us, what did you think of America? Did it work for you as a soap opera?
Well, dear, I really don't think this series will take off. I'm not in it. But I really don't understand how ABC could possibly imagine that the public is interested in people who are not rich. I mean, the women dressed so poorly. They actually wore kerchiefs. The women in this series all seemed to derive their power by going to bed with men. And Well, I think Alexis has proved that you don't need to go to bed with a man to take advantage of him. You just make him think you might. But I think the real failing of this series was that they trivialized the grand soap opera tradition by bringing in messy politics, which takes away from the human drama. What will the character wear next? Who will the character seduce? Of course, they did keep up one soap opera tradition, amnesia. The entire country had amnesia. No one seemed to remember how the Russians took over.
Thank you, Joan. She's such a darling. I'm so glad she got back together with Blake Carrington, even if it was just for a few episodes. But you know, I'm sure even Joan Collins would agree that there are more serious elements of America, the miniseries. And here to discuss its foreign policy ramifications is George Schwab, director of the CIA. Now, Mr. Schwab, what bearing do you think America, the miniseries, will have on the foreign policy of America, the country?
Well, that's a stupid question, Barbara. As you are permitted to know, what's on television does not affect foreign policy. It's quite the other way around. But to all events, this show is not a political show, as others here have been saying. It is very simply a report of certain events taking place in the recent future, sort of a pre-documentary, if you will.
Mr. Schwab, you mean this has already happened, or it's going to?
No,
could you explain
I should
this?
say it already will happen. You see, this is the dictatorship being depicted here, which you will have if those of us with the right point of view are not permitted to establish ours first. You see, the choice is before the American people. Anyone who wants to live in a country where McDonald's is spelled with a K, well, so be it. And you basically have a choice. You can be dominated by foreigners, or you can dominate foreigners.
I see. Could you please elucidate a little? Are you saying that there's already been some kind of invasion of America by some foreign forces of some sort?
The invasion begins in Iowa. The Nicaraguans come in. Now, this may seem very strange to you, as Iowa is so small and so far away, and there's no one even there, as far as we know. But you see, the Iowans grow corn, which is rather easily converted into a common Nicaraguan product known as maize, which is in very short supply these days. Now, the Sandinites first thought that they would blockade the ports and mine the harbors of Iowa, but you see, the Iowans cleverly hid them. And so they had to go to Plan 2 to stir up trouble between Iowa and her neighbors, with whom she's lived at peace for several years now. So they found some dissident former socialists, they said they were former socialists, up here in Minnesota, which you see outlined in red by coincidence, and induced them to make cross-border terror raids, creating a refugee situation and causing many Iowans to become ill, annoyed, or to flee into a state of misery down here. That's effectively throwing an Iowan curtain around the entire state, which then, of course, in the dead of night is extended into Nebraska, which, as we know, already has a K in it.
An Iowan curtain. And remember, you heard it first here on Nightlight. But speaking of the Midwest, ABK correspondent Mary Swanson has filed this report from Nebraska.
Good afternoon. I'm Marilee Swanson, here on location with ABK Network News in the heart of the soy basket, Foreclosure, Nebraska. I'm here on the Hegley farm with Nellie and Ed Hegley, who were members of the America cast, and their children, Jeffrey and Sarah. Nellie, how do people hereabouts feel about the miniseries America?
Well, Marilee, we were real glad to have the mini-series here because a lot of folks around here haven't been working for a while. They've been foreclosed. So it was nice to have some jobs, and they gave us meals, too, while we were working. And those stars were real nice to have around. I kind of liked especially that Sam Neill. He was Andre in the mini-series, and Ed here said I had sort of an itch for him, but just because you have an itch doesn't mean you have to scratch. Right, Ed?
I don't know, Nellie.
Why do you think ABC made this miniseries America?
Well,
Ed?
Well, we were talking, and
Ed and I have talked a lot about this, and we think it's because America's gotten too soft about communism and about the Russians, and we need to stay strong, and we need to keep making all those weapons. We keep making more and more weapons so we can keep the peace. Of course, if you build a barn, sooner or later you're going to want to put your horses in it, aren't you?
You know, Nellie, we were just talking the other day that when we were growing up in these parts, a silo was a place where you kept the grain. Nowadays, you look around, those silos are filled with, like, nuclear weapons. I just don't know. With those
Jeffrey, Jeffrey, how was it when your mom and dad were on the America series for you?
Well, usually, you know, we go to the park and I play ball, especially on Saturdays, but this time there were these big tanks in the park and I couldn't play baseball with my friends, so I told them, let's go play war on the tanks, because Mom and Dad are in the movie and we can do it. But then they kicked us off and it kind of blew everything.
Well, what do you think it would be like around here if the Russians actually did take over?
Well, Mom says she doesn't think it's going to happen, and Dad says there wouldn't be any more commercials on television. And then how would I know what to buy, and what am I going to ask for Christmas?
Yeah, I'd probably lose my job. Well, thank you very much. I'm Marilee Swanson with ABK Network News. Please stay with us. Back to you, Barbara.
Thank you, Marilee, for a fascinating report. You know, Marilee had to do some incredible detective work to track down the Hegwe family, who are, in fact, the last remaining small family farmers in America. Good work, Marilee. Our last panelist is a very special guest, someone who has agreed to make a rare, almost live appearance on our broadcast tonight. He's someone who can shed a lot of light on America, our President, Ronald Reagan. Welcome, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Mr. President, welcome.
On television now. The camera is there.
God bless
This is the
you.
moderator. Right here.
What?
You're someone who can shed a lot of light on America.
Oh, gosh, Barbara, it gives me great pleasure to address the Parliament of Rhodesia here tonight, and I wish Nancy could be here to see all the pretty white
faces. We're here discussing the
faces.
miniseries America. Mr. President, when did you first see the miniseries America? When did you first know that you'd seen it, and do you know it now?
Well, Barbara, there's been a lot of confusion about my confusion lately, but, Will, I am afraid I can't get into that question with regards to answering it.
But, Mr. President, the American public is just dying to know more about your views on this miniseries.
Just say I don't know. Say I don't.
Mr. President, could you
Doesn't that
help
make
him out, Mr. Schwab?
Oh.
Speech is here, Mr. President.
You could show us your Danny Ortega doll, perhaps, in the little tank.
I did Danny myself.
Isn't that a MiG of some sort, sir?
Well, it's a T-55 tank that the Sandinoids have millions of them.
Well, Mr. President, you were going to speak about the Soviet takeover of America.
Yes, there is a lot of precedent for the Soviets attempting to take over the United States. Why, I know of two specific examples I could declassify right now here.
Why don't you, sir?
Here. Well, you see, back when I was in the Screen Actors Guild, the Ruskies actually attempted and succeeded in many cases to steal the brains and replace them with Soviet think-alike brains.
But not yours, sir.
No, not mine. I had a protective shield. They stole the brains and made Soviet propaganda-style films which brainwashed the American public into the anti-law and order rebelliousness of the 60s.
Interesting. And
Fortunately, we
the second
succeeded
example?
in thwarting their plans. Well, the second example is more recent. You remember in 1984, during the elections, when we all thought that the Soviet Union was sending high-tech Soviet MiG fighter planes to the Nicaraguans. That's right. And, well, the thing is, they were actually trying to do something much more insidious than that.
Yes?
They were actually sending, that's right, Barbara, flower pots.
Flower pots?
Yes, flower pots. You may think flower pots are actually something very innocent and innocuous, but flower pots can be used as shovels. And well, Managua, Nicaragua, it's you may not know this, but it's actually closer to Houston than Dallas is to reality. And
very
yes.
interesting.
Well, they
Thank
dug
you,
the
sir.
tunnel all the way up into the middle of America's farm belt, where they kidnapped many American upstanding patriotic farmers and replaced them with sinister, shadowy Sandinite lookalikes. And then the Sandinite lookalikes attempted to destabilize the American economy by whining for handouts from the Soviet-sympathizing Congress, which quickly capitulated to their whinings, and I had to veto the so-called Farm Credit Bill to save Western democracy.
Fascinating, Mr. President. Another thing you've heard first on Nightlight.